You are living in a small village in medieval Europe where your biggest worries should be whether the harvest will feed your family through winter, whether the tax collector will leave you enough grain, whether traveling knights will take more chickens than they pay for. But today, something extraordinary is about to change everything you thought you knew about the world. Before we begin this journey together into a world where legend becomes reality and the impossible lands in a common field, if you find yourself drawn into this realm of dragons and medieval life, consider sharing this tale with others who might enjoy a peaceful escape into history. Like the village storytellers of old who kept the best stories alive by passing them from voice to voice, heart to heart, we preserve wonder by sharing it freely. Now let yourself sink deeper into this ancient world where the extraordinary is about to become wonderfully, terrifyingly, comfortably every day. The year is 1200 and you live in a modest stone cottage with thick walls built to last through centuries. Your thatched roof, renewed this spring with golden straw, keeps out the frequent rain. The cottage sits along a lane worn smooth by countless feet, leading from the village centre to the fields beyond. Your village, Little Thornwick by name, though no one remembers why, nestles in a valley between rolling hills covered in oak and ash. Perhaps 50 souls call it home. Farmers, mostly, whose hands are stained with soil that has fed families for generations. There's Godwin, the blacksmith, whose hammer rings from dawn to dusk. Thomas the miller, whose water wheel turns endlessly beside the stream. Father Benedict, whose Latin prayers rise with the morning mist. The village follows patterns old as agriculture itself, everyone knowing their place and purpose. Change comes slowly here, measured in seasons rather than days, and that's how people prefer it. Change usually means trouble. You wake as you always do in the deep blue hour before dawn when the world exists in that peaceful space between night and day, between the dreams that carry you away from daily concerns and the responsibilities that will soon reclaim your attention. This is your favorite time, these quiet minutes when the village sleeps and you alone are witness to the slow birth of another day. No bells have rung yet. Even Father Benedict allows himself a few more moments of rest before calling the faithful to morning prayers that mark the official beginning of the day's labours. The air in your cottage is cool and still carrying the faint but comforting sense of last night's fire, banked carefully in your small hearth, and the dried herbs hanging from your rafters in bundles that represent a year's careful gathering. Rosemary for remembrance and cooking time for courage and seasoning sage, for wisdom and healing lavender, for peace and the sweetness it brings to stored clothing. These are the simple pharmacy and spice cabinet of village life, gathered from field and garden by knowledge passed down through generations of women who understood that survival often depended on what grew wild in hedgerows and what could be cultivated in cottage gardens. Through your single window, no larger than a book. When opened, smaller than a psalter. When compared to the great windows of lords' halls, you can see the first, pale suggestion of light touching the eastern hills, like a gentle hand smoothing a coverlet. The glass is thick and uneven, made by some craftsman whose name has been forgotten, but whose work will outlast him by centuries, its imperfections creating subtle distortions that make the familiar landscape seem dreamlike in the early morning light, as if you're looking at the world through water or through the lens of memory itself. The window glass represents a luxury that speaks to your family's modest prosperity. Most cottages make do with shutters and oiled cloth to keep out weather while admitting light. This single pane of real glass, thick as your thumb and green-tinted like shallow water, transforms your simple dwelling into something approaching comfort. Through it, the world looks softer, more mysterious touched, with the magic that all things possess. in the hour before dawn. You rise from your straw-filled mattress, feeling the rough wool of your blanket catch slightly on hands, calloused by honest work. The kind of calluses that tell stories of tools wielded harvests, gathered animals tended through all the seasons of agricultural life. The floor beneath your feet is stone-worn smooth by the footsteps of previous inhabitants, whose names you don't know, but whose presence you feel in every familiar creak of settling timber, every slight depression worn into stone by daily routines, repeated until they became part of the cottage's character. Your breath mists slightly in the cool air as you reach for your clothes laid out carefully the night before, because morning darkness demands such preparation. The woolen tunic, dyed the brown of earth with dyes made from oak bark, and iron hangs heavy with the weight of honest fabric woven to last for years rather than seasons. Beneath it goes the linen undergarment, soft from many washings in the stream, bleached by sun and weather to the color of cream. The leather boots that await your feet have molded themselves to your personal geography over countless miles of walking the paths between cottage and field village, and to stream familiar places connected by roots worn smooth by daily necessity. These boots represent months of a cobbler's careful work, leather selected and cured and stitched, with the kind of attention to detail that means the difference between comfort and misery during long days of physical labor. The routine of dressing is automatic. Your hands, finding each garment by feel in the dim light, every motion economical and practiced. The tunic woven on Agnes's loom during the long winter evenings when spinning and weaving occupy the hours between supper and sleep fits with the perfect comfort of clothing made by neighbors who know your measurements by sight and your needs by experience. The leather belt that encircles your waist carries the essential tools of daily existence. Your eating knife with its worn wooden handle, a small purse containing a few copper coins that represent your entire portable wealth, and a small iron key that opens the wooden chest where you store your most precious possessions. The belt itself, tooled with simple patterns by the village leatherworker, has darkened with age and wear until it seems almost part of your body. Over your shoulders goes the woolen cloak that serves as protection from weather, additional warmth during cold nights, and bedding when travel requires sleeping rough. This cloak, woven from wool, you helped shear from sheep you've known since they were lambs, dyed with woad to a deep blue that speaks of modest prosperity, represents security against the uncertainties of weather and fortune that can make the difference between survival and suffering. You step outside into the morning air, and the transition from the close warmth of your cottage to the crisp coolness of dawn makes you pause and breathe deeply, filling your lungs with air so fresh it seems to carry the essence of morning itself. The air tastes of grass, wet with dew of wood smoke from banked fires beginning to stir back to life in cottage hearths throughout the village of the rich earthiness of soil that has been worked by human hands for generations, soil that remembers every seed planted, every harvest gathered, every season's cycle of growth and rest. There's a green freshness to the morning air that speaks of rain during the night of crops, growing steadily in fields where your neighbors have invested their hopes for another year's survival of a world renewing itself with the quiet persistence that has sustained agricultural communities since humans first learned to plant seeds and tend growing things. This is the smell of home, of place of belonging to something larger than any individual life. The village around you stirs with the gentle sounds of morning routines, unchanged for centuries, sounds that connect your daily existence to the lives of countless generations who woke to similar dawns, faced similar challenges, found similar comforts in the predictable rhythm of agricultural life. From the cottage next to yours comes the soft splash of water being poured into a wooden basin. Agnes beginning her daily ablutions with the careful attention to cleanliness that marks respectable village folk. The sound of wooden shutters being opened echoes across the village green as families welcome the new day into their homes, inviting light and fresh air to dispel the accumulated staleness of night. Each opening shutter represents a household returning to the community of the waking world, rejoining the collective enterprise of village life after the private hours of sleep and dreams. Somewhere in the distance you hear the patient lowing of cattle being led from their night shelter to the pastures where they'll spend the day, cropping grass and growing fat their milk and meat, representing the foundation of village prosperity. The sound speaks of what the cowherd, beginning his daily routine staff in hand, whistling the ancient calls that guide domesticated animals through their part in the human economy.
You walk toward the village well, your feet finding the path by memory, even in the dim light of early dawn, following a route so familiar that your body knows every stone, every slight rise and dip, every place where careful steps prevent a turned ankle. The well is the heart of the community, the gathering place where news is shared and plans are made, where children learn the subtle art of adult conversation and grown folk practice the delicate dance of village politics that keeps small communities functioning despite the inevitable friction of people living in close quarters. The path to the well is worn into a shallow depression in the earth, polished smooth by the feet of countless villagers carrying countless buckets of water over countless years, each trip adding to the accumulated weight of necessity that has shaped this route between essential resources and daily life. The depression speaks to the conservative nature of human movement. When a path serves its purpose, people follow it until it becomes as permanent as stone. The well itself is ancient beyond memory. Its stones green with moss and age, fitted together with the kind of precision that suggests Roman engineering, or perhaps the work of the mysterious people who lived in this valley before Romans ever dreamed of Britain. No one remembers who built it, though Father Benedict insists it was Christians guided by divine providence, while Old Mary claims it was made by the people who lived here when the world was younger and magic walked more openly in the daylight. The wellhead is surrounded by stones worn smooth by countless hands, drawing countless buckets. The rope grooves cut deep into the rim where hemp has rubbed against stone through decades of daily use. The bucket itself carved from oak that must have come from trees already old when your grandparents were young, descends into darkness with a sound like a prayer, disappearing into depths that seem to connect with the mysterious waters that flow beneath all human endeavor. As you draw water, feeling the bucket rise with the satisfying weight of necessity, fulfill the rope rough against your palms in the familiar way of all useful tools. You hear footsteps approaching across the village green. Agnes emerges from the morning shadows, her own bucket in hand, her greying hair neatly braided and covered with a clean linen cap that speaks to her status as a respectable widow of modest means. She moves with the economical grace of a woman who has learned through long experience to waste neither motion nor energy, every gesture serving a purpose, every step placed with the certainty of someone who knows her place in the world and finds satisfaction in fulfilling it well. Her clothing, while simple, is clean and well mended, speaking to the pride she takes in maintaining standards, even when no one but neighbors will see the results. Morning to you and God's blessing on the day. She says, her voice carrying the gentle accent of this region, each word rounded and softened by local usage that has evolved over generations of people living and talking together in this small corner of the world.
Her tone carries genuine warmth, the easy familiarity of people who have shared the same small space for most of their lives, who know each other's stories and still find pleasure in daily encounters. And to you, Agnes, you reply, steadying the bucket as you pour water into your smaller vessel, the sound of water filling container, a music so familiar you hardly notice it. The air smells of rain past and sun to come. It promises to be a fair day for the harvest festival preparations. Agnes nods, setting her bucket down by the well's edge with the careful attention of someone who has learned that even simple tasks deserve proper attention, stretching her back with the unconscious movement of someone who knows the value of caring for aging joints before they begin to protest the day's labours. Aye, that it does. Father Benedict will be pleased if the weather holds. He's been fretting about holding the blessing outdoors. What with all the preparations we've made and the visitors we're expecting from the neighbouring villages. She pauses, glancing toward the fields that stretch beyond the village centre, where neat rows of barley and rye await the harvest that will determine whether the coming winter brings plenty or privation abundance, or the need to make careful choices about who eats, how much of what. The crops look good, their heads heavy with grain that promises a successful year, but farmers learn early not to count the harvest until it's safely gathered and stored. Though I do hope those knights from yesterday don't choose to return today. She continues, her voice carrying the edge of irritation that honest folk feel when confronted with the casual arrogance of their supposed betters. Bold as brass, they were taking 6 of my finest hens without so much as a "by your leave." Said it was for the king's service, as if King John himself was sitting in their camp, waiting for my chickens to be served at his royal table. You make a sympathetic sound, knowing that the loss of 6 hens represents a significant blow to Agnes's modest economy, a setback that will be felt through the winter months when eggs become scarce and protein precious. In a world where wealth is measured in livestock and grain stores, where a good laying hen can mean the difference between adequate nutrition and hunger, during the lean months before spring brings renewal, such casual theft by passing knights represents more than mere inconvenience. Did they pay anything at all? You ask, though you already know the answer from the set of Agnes's shoulders and the way her mouth tightens at the memory of yesterday's encounter with aristocratic privilege backed by steel and justified by birth rather than worth. A handful of copper coins worth perhaps half what one hen would bring at market, and that only after I made enough noise to wake the dead. She says, bending to fill her bucket with the practiced efficiency of long habit, her movements automatic after decades of drawing water from this same well. But what choice was there? They had swords and the authority of noble birth, and we have prayers and the hope that God notices when the powerful take from the powerless. This is the way of things in your world, as fixed and unchangeable as the seasons themselves, part of the natural order that places kings above lords, lords above knights, knights above freemen, and freemen above serfs, in a hierarchy as rigid as the stones of the castle walls. Knights travel the countryside on errands they claim serve the king's business, taking what they need and offering payment that functions more as acknowledgement of their theoretical obligation than as genuine compensation for goods received. Villages endure because enduring is what villages do, because the alternative to endurance is extinction, and because the common folk who do the actual work of keeping civilization functioning have learned that survival requires accepting injustices that cannot be prevented or corrected. You pay your taxes to Lord Aldrich in his castle on the hill. You tithe to the church as God and tradition demand, and you hope that what remains will see you through another winter and into another spring. The system has persisted for generations because it provides stability, even when it fails to provide justice, creating a framework within which ordinary people can plan their lives and raise their children with some reasonable expectation that the rules will remain constant. The lords protect, or claim to protect, the realm from external enemies. The priests intercede with heaven on behalf of earthly concerns, and the peasants work the land that feeds everyone. It's not a perfect system, but it's a system that functions, and functionality often matters more than fairness when survival is always uncertain. You walk together toward the fields, your feet finding the path that generations of villagers have worn between the well and the agricultural lands that sustain the community, a route so familiar that your body follows it without conscious direction, while your mind enjoys the pleasure of morning conversation with a long-time neighbor. Agnes talks quietly about her plans for the day. There's washing to be done, while the weather holds fair bread to be baked for the evening meal, and preparations to complete for the harvest festival that will mark the end of summer's work and the beginning of winter's long wait. The path leads past cottages where other villagers are beginning their daily routines, each household following patterns established by necessity and refined by generations of practice. Through open doors, you catch glimpses of families gathering around rough wooden tables for their morning meal. Bread and ale, for all perhaps some cheese, if the household enjoys modest prosperity, maybe an apple from the trees that grow in every cottage garden that has space and soil to support them. Children emerge from doorways, rubbing sleep from their eyes with the backs of small hands, ready to take on the day's simple tasks of helping their parents and learning the skills they'll need for their own adult lives. Their voices add a musical accompaniment to the morning as they call to friends, argue over games, and begin the informal education that happens in the spaces between work. The morning light grows stronger as you walk, painting the world in the soft colors of early autumn that speak of completion and preparation of harvest gathered and winter approaching. The leaves on the oak trees that border the fields show hints of the golden brown they'll wear in a few weeks' time, nature's signal that another year moves toward its natural conclusion. The grass retains its green color, but shows the first suggestions of the dormancy that will carry it through the cold months ahead. Everything in this landscape speaks of the eternal cycle of growth and rest work and reward that governs agricultural life and provides the rhythm within which human communities organize their existence. This is a world that makes sense where cause and effect follow predictable patterns, where hard work and careful planning generally produce the results that experience suggests they should. But as you crest the small hill that overlooks the valley where your village nestles like a child cupped in protecting hands, something unusual catches your eye and brings your peaceful morning walk to an abrupt halt. A shadow far larger than any bird you've ever seen, far larger than any bird that should exist in the natural world, passes across the pale morning sun with movements that speak of purpose and power rather than the random flight of ordinary creatures. For a moment your mind tries to rationalize what you're seeing. Perhaps it's just a cloud, you tell yourself, though clouds don't move with such deliberate intention. Maybe it's an optical illusion created by morning mist and unusual light, though the shadow has substance and definition that resist such comfortable explanations. Surely there's a simple explanation, something that fits within the boundaries of the world you know and understand. But as you watch shading your eyes with your hand and squinting up at the sky that has suddenly become a place of mystery rather than familiar comfort, the shadow passes again. This time, there's no mistaking what you see. Wings enormous beyond belief, stretched wide against the pale morning sky with a span that defies every assumption you've ever made about what is possible in the natural world. Your heart begins to beat faster, though your mind refuses to accept the implications of what your eyes are showing you. Agnes stops beside you, following your gaze upward, her own expression shifting from casual morning conversation to puzzlement, and then to something approaching the kind of fear that comes when the familiar world suddenly reveals aspects that challenge everything you thought you knew about reality. The shadow passes a third time closer now, and the sound that accompanies it reaches your ears, not the whisper of wind through ordinary feathers, but something deeper, more powerful, a rhythmic beating that seems to push against the very air itself. Your chest vibrates in sympathy with the sound, and you realize that whatever is approaching possesses a physical presence that affects the world around it in ways that transcend mere visual impact. And then you hear it clearly, a sound like nothing in your experience, a deep, resonant call that seems to come from the very earth itself, rolling across the valley like thunder, but different, more purposeful, more aware. The sound reverberates in your bones, in the stones beneath your feet, in the air that surrounds you, announcing the arrival of something that belongs to legend rather than ordinary morning experience.
Agnes grabs your arm, her fingers digging into the wool of your cloak with the desperate grip of someone whose orderly world is suddenly dramatically changing in ways that challenge every assumption she's ever made about the nature of reality. Sweet Mary, Mother of God, she whispers, her voice carrying all the shock and dawning terror of someone whose familiar universe has just expanded to include possibilities she never imagined. What in the name of all the saints was that?
The sound comes again closer now, and this time there's no mistaking it for anything natural or explainable within the comfortable boundaries of ordinary experience. Something vast approaches your village, something that makes the ground beneath your feet vibrate with each beat of wings so large they seem to embrace the sky itself. The vibration travels up through your legs like a message written in a language older than words, settles in your stomach like fear made physical, and sets your teeth on edge with its alien power that speaks of forces beyond human understanding. You stand frozen on the hillside watching as the shadow grows larger, more defined, more impossible with each passing moment. Agnes's grip on your arm tightens until her fingers dig into your flesh through the thick wool, but you barely notice the discomfort. Every fiber of your being focuses on the sky, on the approaching impossibility that your mind struggles desperately to categorize within some framework that makes sense according to everything you've ever been taught about the world. And then you see it with a clarity that leaves no room for doubt or comfortable self-deception.
The dragon. A real living, breathing dragon. Its scales gleaming bronze and gold in the morning sunlight like some fantastic piece of jewelry, wrought by divine craftsmen and brought to life by powers beyond mortal comprehension. The creature is longer than the village church, longer than the church, and Father Benedict's modest dwelling combined, with a wingspan that would cover the entire village green and cast shadows over every cottage in Little Thornwick.
Its massive head turns as it flies, scanning the ground below with eyes like burning amber, intelligent and ancient and utterly alien to anything in your experience of living creatures. Those eyes speak of knowledge accumulated over centuries of wisdom that predates human civilization, of awareness that encompasses realms of understanding no mortal mind has ever glimpsed. When they fix on the landscape below, you sense that they see not just the physical reality of village and field, but layers of meaning and possibility that remain invisible to ordinary perception. The creature's wings beat with a rhythm that speaks of immense power held in careful control, each downstroke sending ripples through the air, that you can actually see distortions in the morning light, like heat waves rising from summer stones but powered by forces that dwarf any earthly fire. The membranes of its wings are translucent in places, showing the intricate network of what might be blood vessels or might be something else entirely, something beyond your understanding of how living things are constructed or how they function within the natural order. The wings themselves are marvels of engineering that surpass any human construction, vast expanses of membrane stretched between bones as thick as tree trunks, supported by structures that seem to defy the laws of weight and leverage that govern earthly flight. Each wing appears to be larger than the sail of the greatest ship you've ever heard described, yet they move with the fluid grace of a swallow's wings, demonstrating a mastery of aerial movement that transforms flight from mere mechanical motion into something approaching artistry. When the dragon opens its mouth, revealing an interior that glows within a fire, you glimpse teeth the size of sword blades gleaming white against the dark cavern of its maw. Each tooth appears perfectly crafted for its purpose, whether that purpose involves tearing or crushing or some function beyond your ability to imagine. And smoke, actual smoke, curls from its nostrils, not the black smoke of burning wood or coal that you know from human fires, but something cleaner, more ethereal, like the steam that rises from hot metal when it's plunged into water, but tinged with colors that have no names in any human tongue. Your mind struggles desperately to accept what you're seeing, to find some way to reconcile this impossible vision with everything you've been taught about the nature of reality. Dragons are stories, tales told by traveling minstrels to entertain children and drunk farmers on long winter nights, when imagination provides the only escape from the harsh realities of medieval existence. They're carved into church doorways as symbols of evil overcome by Christian virtue, painted in illuminated manuscripts by monks who never expected anyone to take their artistic creations as literal depictions of living creatures. Dragons exist in the realm of legend alongside unicorns and phoenix birds, griffins, and other creatures that represent spiritual truths rather than physical realities, symbols and metaphors rather than beings of flesh and blood and fire. They belong to the stories that explain moral lessons, not to the world where farmers plant seeds and harvest grain, where children are born and grow old and die, where the practical concerns of survival leave little room for the fantastic and impossible. But this creature flying toward your village is undeniably, impossibly, magnificently real. Its scales catch the morning light and throw it back in patterns that hurt to look at directly, creating displays of reflected brilliance that seem to contain their own inner fire. Its breath steams in the cool morning air, visible proof of the life and heat contained within that massive body evidence of biological processes that operate on a scale you've never imagined possible. When it adjusts its wings to catch a thermal rising from the sun-warmed earth, the movement is so perfectly natural, so obviously the product of a lifetime spent mastering the currents and flows of aerial navigation, that no amount of disbelief can dismiss it as illusion or imagination. This is a creature that belongs in the sky as completely as fish belong in water, or humans belong on solid ground. A being whose every movement speaks of evolutionary adaptation to an element that humans can only visit temporarily and with great difficulty. The dragon circles lower, and now you can hear more than just its voice and the rhythm of its wings. There's the whistle of wind through flight feathers, a sound like a continuous sigh that speaks of air, moved by surfaces never meant to disturb human skies, never intended to be witnessed by earthbound eyes. There's the deep, rhythmic breathing that sounds like a great bellows, working steadily, each inhalation and exhalation moving volumes of air that create their own weather patterns in miniature, their own atmospheric disturbances that ripple outward from the creature's passage. Heat radiates from its body in waves so intense you can feel them even from this considerable distance, like standing near Godwin's forge when the blacksmith is working iron into submission with fire and hammer. But this heat carries qualities that no earthly fire possesses. It warms without burning, penetrates without destroying, and brings with it sense unlike anything in your experience. The air around the dragon shimmers with thermal distortions that speak of internal fires maintained at temperatures no human technology could achieve or sustain. The heat carries aromas that defy description or comparison. Metallic, but not unpleasant, sharp, but not acrid ancient, in a way that suggests this creature remembers times when the world was younger and stranger than the ordered realm you inhabit. There's something in those scents that speaks of deep caves and molten rock of treasures accumulated over centuries of knowledge preserved in forms that human learning has never approached. Below in the village you hear the first shouts of alarm as other early risers catch sight of the approaching impossibility. Voices raised in disbelief and terror echo across the valley, the sound of doors slamming shut with the finality of desperate hope that wooden barriers might provide protection against powers beyond mortal understanding. The frantic squawking of chickens fills the air as they scatter in mindless panic, their tiny brains overwhelmed by the presence of a predator so far beyond their evolutionary experience that their usual survival responses simply shut down. Someone screams, a high, thin sound that cuts through the morning air like a knife through cloth-piercing and primal, and speaking to fears that reach back to humanity's earliest memories of a time when creatures larger and more powerful than humans ruled the earth. The village bell begins to ring not with the measured cadence of morning prayers or the joyful celebration of feast days, but with the frantic, irregular clanging that announces disaster emergency, the kind of crisis that demands immediate response from every able-bodied person in the community. The dragon's great head swivels toward the sound of the bell, and for a moment its flight falters as it hovers in the air, wings working with increased effort to maintain position while it studies this new stimulus with obvious curiosity. Its expression, and yes, it definitely has an expression, intelligence and personality, looking out through those amber eyes that seem older than the hills themselves, appears more curious than threatening, more interested than aggressive. The creature's reaction reminds you of nothing so much as a cat investigating an interesting sound alert and attentive, but not necessarily hostile. But this is a cat the size of a building, possessed of powers that could level your entire village without noticeable effort. And the comparison provides little comfort, even as it suggests that the dragon's intentions might not be immediately destructive. Then the creature makes a decision that will change everything about your village's future, everything about your own life, everything about the relationship between the world of legends and the world of daily reality. It folds its wings partially and begins to descend, not in the rapid dive of a predator attacking prey, but in the controlled spiral of something that has decided to land, to make contact, to transform itself from distant wonder into immediate presence. Its destination becomes clear as it approaches, the common field where the village cattle usually graze. During daylight hours, the largest open space in Little Thornwick, and the only area that might possibly accommodate a creature of such enormous proportions. The field that represents the community's collective wealth in the form of livestock that provide milk and meat leather and labor security against the uncertainties that always threaten agricultural communities. Agnes makes a small, choked sound and begins to back away from the hillside, her hand still clutching your arm with the desperate grip of someone whose familiar world is dissolving around her like morning mist before a strong wind. We should run, she whispers, her voice barely audible over the increasing sound of the dragon's approach. The rush of air through wings larger than ship sails the rhythmic breathing that grows louder with each passing moment. We should run and hide and pray to all the saints that it doesn't. But you find yourself rooted to the spot, caught between terror that threatens to reduce you to mindless flight and fascination that demands you witness this moment that will divide your life forever into before and after. This is impossible, but it's happening before your eyes. This is the stuff of legends, but it's landing in your village, in your reality, in your morning, that began with such ordinary concerns as drawing water and planning the day's simple tasks. Some deep instinct, older than reason and stronger than fear, tells you that witnessing this moment is more important than fleeing from it, that this convergence of legend and reality represents something larger than immediate personal safety or even the welfare of your community. You are about to become part of a story that will be told for generations, a witness to the moment when the impossible became possible, when the boundaries between myth and reality proved more permeable than anyone had ever imagined. The dragon touches down with surprising grace for something so massive, its landing more like the arrival of a great ship at harbor than the crash you might have expected from such an enormous creature. Its hind legs contact the earth, first claws sinking deep into the soft soil of the pasture with a sound like roots finding purchase in fertile ground. The ground shakes with the impact, but it's not the violent earthquake you might have anticipated. Instead, it's more like the feeling of a very large tree falling somewhere in the deep forest, significant and noticeable, but controlled rather than chaotic. The creature's front legs follow, completing its transition from aerial to terrestrial existence with movements that speak of long practice of countless similar landings in countless other places. Each leg appears to be thicker than the largest oak tree in the village, yet they move with precision and delicacy that suggests careful consideration for the earth and everything upon it. The dragon folds its wings against its massive body with movements that seem to follow some internal choreography perfected over decades or centuries of practice. Each wing is indeed larger than the sail of any ship you've ever imagined, yet they fold with the precise efficiency of a master craftsman organizing tools at the end of a day's work. The membranes settle into perfect pleats. The wing bones align with geometric precision that would impress any engineer. And suddenly, the dragon looks smaller, though still enormous by any reasonable standard, and somehow more approachable, more compatible with earthbound existence. For a long moment that seems to stretch into eternity, dragon and village regard each other in absolute silence that carries the weight of first contact between species, between worlds, between reality and legend. The frantic ringing of the bell has stopped, as if whoever was pulling the rope has been struck dumb by the sight before them, overwhelmed by the magnitude of what they're witnessing. Even the chickens have fallen silent, their tiny minds perhaps shut down by the presence of something so far outside their understanding that their usual response mechanisms simply cease to function. The dragon's head moves slowly as it surveys its new surroundings, taking in the thatched roofs that cap each cottage like golden crowns. The stone church tower that reaches toward heaven with human ambition. The wisps of smoke rising from chimneys as families huddle inside their homes and wonder what this visitation might mean for their future. Its nostrils flare delicately, testing the air with the careful attention of a creature gathering information through senses that might perceive far more than human understanding can encompass. You wonder what a dragon smells when it examines a human village for the first time. Wood, smoke and bread, certainly, the basic aromatics of human civilization, the earthy sense of livestock and growing things that speak to agricultural prosperity. The metallic tang of Godwin's forge, where iron is shaped into the tools that make human life possible. But does it also smell fear and wonder, hope and uncertainty? The indefinable essence of human community built from individual lives woven together by necessity and choice. Then the dragon's stomach rumbles. The sound is extraordinary, unlike anything you've ever heard. In a lifetime of farm experience with creatures large and small, it's like thunder rolling across the valley, deep and resonant and unmistakably the sound of hunger, but hunger on a scale that transforms a familiar sensation into something awe-inspiring and slightly terrifying. This is not the simple appetite of a creature that missed its morning meal, but the hunger of a being whose body is measured in tons rather than pounds, whose daily caloric requirements must be staggering beyond calculation. The sound reverberates through the ground beneath your feet, through the air that surrounds you, through your own body until you feel it in your bones and in the rhythm of your heartbeat. It speaks of metabolic needs proportional to a creature the size of a tower of internal fires that probably require constant feeding to maintain their temperature and power of biological processes that operate on scales no human has ever had to consider. You realize with a mixture of fascination and growing concern that settles like a cold stone in your stomach that this magnificent, impossible beast is probably very, very hungry, and that your small village with its modest collection of sheep and cattle, chickens and goats, pigs and draft animals that represent the accumulated wealth of generations of careful husbandry suddenly represents something very different than it did just moments before. The dragon's great head turns toward the village proper, those amber eyes that seem to hold depths of ancient knowledge, focusing with unmistakable interest on the buildings where people are hiding, on the spaces where human life unfolds its daily dramas of work and rest, celebration and sorrow. Its nostrils flare again more deliberately this time, and you realize it's conducting some kind of systematic inventory, cataloging resources with the methodical attention of a creature that understands the relationship between appetite and available supplies. Cattle, sheep, goats, chickens, pigs, horses. And though you try desperately not to think about it, humans themselves, the dragon's survey continues with what appears to be scientific thoroughness, its great head turning to examine different sections of the village, different concentrations of potential food sources. But there's something in its manner that suggests more than simple predatory assessment, a quality of thoughtful consideration that implies intelligence planning, perhaps even a capacity for negotiation rather than mere consumption. You make your way carefully down the hill, moving slowly to avoid drawing the dragon's attention, while simultaneously finding yourself irresistibly drawn toward the most extraordinary event in your village's long history, perhaps the most extraordinary event in any village's history since humans first began gathering in communities for mutual support and protection. Agnes follows reluctantly, her grip on your arm serving as much to steady herself as to restrain you from what she clearly considers a suicidal approach to mortal danger beyond anything their shared experience has prepared them to handle. The village has transformed in the space of minutes from a peaceful agricultural community awakening to another ordinary day into something resembling a settlement under siege, though the threat comes not from human enemies, but from a creature that exists in the borderland between reality and myth. Doors that are normally left open to welcome neighbors and morning air are now firmly barred, their heavy wooden surfaces reinforced with whatever furniture their occupants could quickly pile against them in a desperate attempt to create barriers against the unimaginable. Windows that usually frame friendly faces checking on the weather or greeting neighbors are now shuttered tight, their surfaces blank and unwelcoming, though you can see the occasional gleam of an eye peering through cracks in the wood. The watchers represent the eternal human drive to witness events even when wisdom suggests that observation might be dangerous, the irresistible need to see what cannot be unseen, to experience what cannot be unexperienced. The streets usually busy with the morning's activities as people begin their daily routines of work, and commerce lie empty, except for a few chickens too stupid to seek shelter, and one of Thomas's goats that seems more interested in the new arrival than afraid of it. The goat, a venerable old nanny named Hildegard, who has survived more village crises than anyone can remember, stands at the edge of the common field, calmly chewing cud, and regarding the dragon with the same expression she usually reserves for newcomers to the village. Mildly curious, but fundamentally unimpressed by novelty, Hildegard represents the kind of practical wisdom that comes from long experience with the unpredictable nature of existence. The understanding that survival often depends on maintaining perspective, even when circumstances seem designed to overwhelm ordinary responses. Her calm presence in the face of impossibility provides a strange comfort, a reminder that life continues even when the fundamental nature of reality appears to have changed overnight. The dragon, for its part, seems fascinated by Hildegard's matter-of-fact acceptance of its presence. Its enormous head lowers until it's nearly at ground level, studying the goat with the intensity of a scholar examining a particularly interesting manuscript, a creature of vast intelligence trying to understand the workings of a mind that operates according to principles it has never encountered before. Hildegard, showing the kind of aplomb that has made her a village legend, simply continues chewing and occasionally blinks at the creature that could swallow her in a single gulp without noticeable effort. Her behavior suggests either complete fearlessness or such limited imagination that she cannot grasp the magnitude of the situation she faces, and in practical terms the distinction hardly matters, since both responses produce the same result: a demonstration of dignity in the face of the impossible. You slip between houses, staying close to the walls and moving with the careful stealth that every village child learns when trying to avoid extra chores or parental attention, using shadows and architectural features to mask your approach to the village square. The morning light creates deep pools of darkness between buildings, and you use these refuges to move closer to the heart of the community, where you can hear the low murmur of voices engaged in urgent conversation that will determine how Little Thornwick responds to the arrival of legend in their midst. The square, normally the domain of merchants displaying their wares and children at play, has been transformed into an impromptu council chamber where the village's most prominent citizens have gathered to address a situation that no amount of practical experience or traditional wisdom has prepared them to handle. The meeting has the desperate quality of people trying to solve a problem that exceeds every framework they possess for understanding and responding to crisis. Father Benedict stands at the center of the group, his prayer book clutched in hands that shake just slightly, with the magnitude of the theological implications spreading before him like ripples in still water. The priest's usual air of calm authority has been replaced by the expression of a man whose entire understanding of divine order has been challenged by the arrival of a creature that exists somewhere between scripture and fairy tale, between religious symbol and physical reality. Thomas the Miller occupies his usual position as the village's primary decision maker, his practical mind already working on the logistics of the situation, even as he struggles to accept that such logistics might be necessary. His clothes are dusted with flour from the morning's work that he abandoned when reports of the dragon's arrival reached his mill, and his strong hands gesture as he talks, sketching solutions in the air with the confidence of someone accustomed to solving problems through direct action and careful planning. Master Geoffrey stands beside Thomas, representing the village's technical expertise in matters of construction and engineering, his knowledge of building and craftsmanship suddenly relevant to questions of accommodation and infrastructure that no medieval community has ever had to consider. His weathered face bears the expression of someone trying to apply familiar principles to unprecedented challenges.
Old Mary has claimed a place in the council despite the fact that no one invited her, and no one would dare to exclude her, her presence justified by the universal recognition that if anyone in the village might have heard stories that could help make sense of this situation, it would be Mary, whose memory stretches back to tales told by her own grandmother and beyond. She leans heavily on her walking stick, but her eyes are bright, with an intelligence undimmed by her many years and sharpened by the kind of experience that comes from surviving every crisis that a long life can contain.
Godwin the blacksmith completes the group, his massive forearms crossed over his leather apron, his face bearing the expression of a man trying to solve a particularly challenging technical problem using principles and tools that might prove inadequate to the task at hand. His forge has been abandoned, the fire banked, but still glowing tools scattered where he dropped them when the dragon's call first echoed across the valley and transformed his ordinary morning into something extraordinary. You edge closer, Agnes close behind you, until you can hear their conversation without revealing your presence, becoming witnesses to the discussion that will shape your village's response to the most significant event in its history. The voices carry the tension of people trying to address a situation that exceeds every precedent they can recall, every story they've heard, every framework they possess for understanding how communities respond to the impossible. Can't simply be a test. Thomas is saying his voice carrying the authority of a man accustomed to making decisions that affect the entire community, decisions that must balance individual welfare against collective survival. Tests from the Almighty typically involve moral choices, temptations to sin, or opportunities for virtue. This is something else entirely. Father Benedict adjusts his grip on his prayer book, the leather binding worn smooth by years of use and sudden need, his theological training warring with the evidence of his senses in ways that challenge every assumption about the relationship between divine will and earthly reality. Yet Scripture tells us that God's creation encompasses all manner of beasts. He says, though his voice wavers slightly with uncertainty, that undermines his attempt at doctrinal authority. The book of Job speaks of leviathan creatures of great power and mystery. The Psalms mention beasts that surpass human understanding. Perhaps this dragon too is part of the divine plan, a manifestation of divine power beyond our ability to comprehend or categorize. Or Old Mary makes a sound that might be agreement or might be skepticism, her weathered face showing the kind of expression that comes from having heard many confident explanations for things that resist explanation. In the old stories, she says, her voice carrying the weight of decades spent collecting and preserving the oral traditions that form the village's collective memory. Dragons were wise as well as powerful. Not mindless beasts driven by hunger and instinct, but creatures of intelligence and purpose, beings who acted according to their own forms of law and custom. If the tales speak true, this one will have come here for a reason, with intentions we might understand if we approach the situation with proper respect and careful attention. Master Geoffrey ever practical gestures toward the dragon, which has now begun to move around the field with the careful steps of something trying not to break anything important, examining its new environment with the methodical attention of a creature gathering information before making decisions. Wise or not, it needs feeding. Look at the size of it. What does a creature like that eat, and how much, and how often? These are questions that affect every household in the village, every plan we make for surviving the winter, every calculation about our ability to sustain ourselves and our new neighbor. This question hangs in the air like smoke from a green fire, acrid and impossible to ignore, carrying implications that touch every aspect of village life, from the most practical concerns about food storage to the most philosophical questions about the nature of coexistence between species. The dragon is indeed massive, its body suggesting a metabolism that would require enormous amounts of fuel to maintain energy needs that could easily overwhelm the resources of a small agricultural community. Godwin, whose work with metal and fire gives him insights into the practical aspects of heat and energy that others might lack, nods grimly at Master Geoffrey's assessment. A forge fire consumes wood and coal at a steady rate just to maintain working temperature. He says, his voice carrying the authority of someone who understands the relationship between fuel and function. A creature that breathes flame, that maintains internal fires hot enough to melt metal. Its energy requirements must be staggering beyond anything we can easily supply. We'll have to negotiate, Thomas declares with a kind of matter-of-fact acceptance that has seen the village through famines and tax collectors, travelling armies and harsh winters, all the challenges that test the survival skills of small communities. Like we do with the king's men or the knights or the church hierarchy, set up a tribute system, establish regular payments, create agreements that satisfy its needs while preserving our ability to survive. It's what we've always done when faced with powers greater than our own.
Agnes shifts beside you and her movement catches Father Benedict's attention despite your attempts to remain inconspicuous. He looks up, sees your presence and beckons you forward with a gesture that makes refusal impossible, transforming you from hidden observer into active participant in the discussion that will determine your community's future.
Come, he says, his voice carrying forced calm that doesn't quite mask the uncertainty beneath. We need all the wisdom we can gather and witnesses as well. You saw the creature's arrival. What was your impression? How did it behave? What did you observe that might help us understand its intentions? You step into the circle of worried faces, feeling the weight of their attention and the magnitude of the situation settling on your shoulders like a lead cloak that threatens to overwhelm your ability to think clearly or speak coherently. These are people whose judgment you trust, whose experience you respect, and now they're asking for your observations about something that exceeds every framework any of you possess for understanding the world.
It seemed... you begin, then pause, searching for words to describe something that defies description, trying to find language adequate to convey impressions of behavior so far outside normal experience that ordinary vocabulary seems inadequate. It seemed curious rather than aggressive. When it landed, it was careful not to damage anything precise in its movements despite its enormous size. And the way it looked at Hildegard.
Godwin rumbles his deep voice carrying approval for your observation. I noticed that too, like it was trying to understand rather than simply seeing prey, studying rather than hunting. There was intelligence in that examination purpose beyond simple appetite. Old Mary taps her walking stick against the cobblestones, the sound sharp in the morning air, and somehow reassuring in its ordinary purposefulness. The old tales speak of dragons who kept treasure, who made bargains and honoured agreements, once made creatures of law as much as power. If this one follows the old ways, if it remembers the ancient customs, her words trail off as the dragon's voice rises again, not the thunderous call of its arrival that announced its presence to the entire valley, but something softer, more modulated, almost conversationally in its tone and rhythm. The creature has moved to a new part of the field and seems to be examining various objects left by yesterday's activities. A wooden cart abandoned when its owner fled a pile of turnips intended for the pigs, a collection of tools awaiting repair. As you watch from your position in the village square, the dragon delicately sniffs at each item, its great head moving with careful precision that speaks of deliberate investigation rather than random curiosity. When it reaches the turnips, it makes a small sound, almost like a hum of interest, and gently nudges the pile with one massive claw, rearranging the vegetables with the careful attention of someone conducting an inventory. It's conducting an assessment, Master Jeffries says, with sudden understanding his experience with organizing construction projects, providing insight into the dragon's systematic approach. Looking at what's available, examining the resources, evaluating the situation like a merchant examining goods before making an offer, or a lord surveying a new territory before establishing administration. Father Benedict clutches his prayer book tighter, his knuckles white against the dark leather. Then perhaps we should approach it formally, as we would any dignitary or trading partner. If it possesses intelligence, if it operates according to some form of law or custom, then communication might be possible. The suggestion hangs in the air like morning mist, visible but insubstantial, carrying within it possibilities both hopeful and terrifying. The idea of walking up to a dragon and attempting to negotiate seems like the kind of thing that exists only in stories told to amuse children or in the fever dreams of people who have consumed too much ale. But then again, until this morning, dragons themselves existed only in stories, and the evidence of your eyes suggests that the boundaries between story and reality are far more permeable than anyone had ever imagined. Thomas looks around the circle of faces, reading the mixture of fear and desperate hope written there, seeing the reflection of his own uncertainty in the expressions of people whose welfare depends on the decisions made in the next few minutes. Who speaks for the village when lords or tax collectors come calling? He asks rhetorically, his voice carrying the weight of tradition and established procedure. We do, together, as we always have, as our fathers did before us and their fathers before them. But this isn't a lord or a tax collector. Agnes points out, her voice tight with the strain of trying to apply familiar frameworks to unprecedented circumstances. This is a creature that could reduce our entire village to ash without breaking stride, without noticeable effort, without any consequences that might restrain its actions. Old Mary's eyes glitter with something that might be amusement or might be the kind of wisdom that comes from having survived enough crises to understand that all problems, regardless of their apparent magnitude, must be approached with the same fundamental tools of human intelligence and determination. "Child," she says gently, her voice carrying the authority of age and experience, "every tax collector I've ever met could reduce this village to poverty without breaking stride, without noticeable effort, and with legal authority that makes resistance pointless. The only difference between this dragon and any other powerful being we've had to accommodate is the method of potential destruction, and the fact that we don't yet understand the rules that govern its behavior. The comparison provides an unexpected framework for understanding their situation, a way of thinking about the dragon that connects it to familiar challenges of survival in a world dominated by powers beyond the control of ordinary people. Villages have always existed at the mercy of forces larger than themselves, kings and lords, armies and tax collectors, plagues and famines, weather, and economic systems that operate according to rules set by people who never have to live with the consequences of their decisions. In that context, a dragon becomes simply another powerful entity that must be accommodated, another force that must be understood and appeased, another challenge that tests the community's ability to adapt and survive. The difference lies not in the fundamental nature of the challenge, but in the specific requirements and limitations that govern this particular form of coexistence. Just as the village council begins to form the skeleton of a plan, an approach based more on hope than strategy, more on necessity than confidence, but still representing a coherent response to unprecedented circumstances, the sound of hoofbeats echoes from the main road with the familiar rhythm that has announced the arrival of trouble for as long as anyone can remember. The cadence is unmistakable. The measured strike of iron-shod hooves against packed earth, the rhythmic percussion of war horses carrying armed knights who expect the road to clear before them and the world to accommodate their passage. Sir Roderick leads the party, riding with the easy confidence of someone who has spent his entire adult life in the saddle, his destrier responding to subtle shifts in weight and pressure that speak to years of partnership between warrior and mount. He sits his horse with the unconscious grace that marks professional cavalry, his mail hauberk gleaming with the kind of meticulous maintenance that speaks of pride in equipment and understanding that survival often depends on the condition of one's gear. The knight's reputation for dragon-slaying stories has made him welcome at many a lord's table throughout the region, his tales of heroic encounters with mythical beasts providing entertainment that combines the thrill of danger with the comfort of knowing that the storyteller survived to share his adventures. His surcoat bears the red lion of his house, the heraldic symbol that announces his identity and authority to all who recognize the significance of such displays, and his sword belt supports a blade whose pommel is worn smooth by years of use in both practice and genuine conflict. Behind Sir Roderick rides Sir Godwin the Younger, called so to distinguish him from your village blacksmith, though the knight's hands have never known the honest calluses of forge work or the satisfaction of creating tools that serve human needs. And young Sir Marcus, barely old enough to grow a proper beard, but eager to prove himself worthy of the spurs that mark his elevation to knighthood. Their horses are fine beasts bred specifically for war and trained to charge into the chaos of battle without flinching, to carry their riders through circumstances that would overwhelm ordinary mounts. The quality of their equipment speaks to the economic realities of medieval warfare, where success depends on the ability to maintain expensive animals and sophisticated gear that represent investments beyond the reach of common folk. These are professional warriors whose entire existence depends on their ability to project power through the threat or application of violence, men whose identity and livelihood require them to demonstrate courage in the face of any challenge that might arise. "Fear not, good people," Sir Roderick calls out as they enter the village square, his voice carrying the kind of hearty confidence that comes from never having encountered a problem that couldn't be solved with sufficient application of sharp steel and righteous determination. "We heard tell of some unusual circumstances affecting your community. Rest assured we are here to restore proper order and protect innocent Christians from whatever forces of darkness have manifested themselves in this place." His speech carries the assumption that any problem facing a village can be resolved through the application of knightly virtue and military skill, that the social order that places warriors at the apex of secular hierarchy exists precisely to handle situations that exceed the capabilities of common folk. This is the worldview that justifies the privileges and obligations of the knightly class, the belief that noble birth and military training create both the right and the responsibility to intervene in crises that threaten the stability of Christian civilization. But Sir Roderick's confident proclamation falters somewhat as he catches sight of the dragon in the field beyond the village centre, his practiced eye taking in details that challenge every assumption he's ever made about the nature of the enemies a knight might expect to face. The creature has heard the arrival of the knights and has raised its great head to study these new additions to the gathering. Its posture suggesting interest rather than alarm, but carrying undertones of power held in ready reserve. The dragon's examination of the knights seems to involve more than simple visual assessment. Its nostrils flare delicately as it tests the air, perhaps analyzing scents that carry information about these armored strangers, their intentions, their capabilities, their place in the complex social hierarchy that governs human communities. The creature's intelligence becomes apparent in the systematic way it conducts this evaluation, taking time to gather information before responding to what might be perceived as either threat or opportunity. Sir Roderick's Destria, a massive warhorse trained to charge into formations of enemy infantry without hesitation, demonstrates that all its expensive training has limitations when confronted with threats that exist outside the normal parameters of medieval warfare. The animal takes one long look at the dragon, processes what it sees through instincts shaped by millions of years of evolution that have taught horses to recognize and flee from large predators, and begins to back up with the kind of rapid, determined movement that suggests its survival mechanisms have suddenly overruled years of expensive training. The Destria's reaction represents a fundamental conflict between learned behavior and instinctive wisdom, between the artificial requirements of human warfare and the natural responses that have kept horses alive for millennia before humans ever thought to domesticate them. In this case, biological wisdom proves stronger than military conditioning, and the horse's eyes show white around the edges as they fix on the dragon with the kind of focused terror that comes from recognizing a predator that exceeds every defensive capability the prey species possesses.
"Steady, you cowardly beast!" Sir Roderick mutters his voice, carrying less of its earlier confidence as he pulls hard on the reins in an attempt to force his mount forward to maintain the kind of control that knightly dignity requires. But the Destria has apparently decided that some threats exceed the scope of its professional obligations, and no amount of training can compel it to approach something that every instinct screams should be avoided at all costs. Sir Godwin's horse experiences similar difficulties, though his mount's response takes a different form. The animal spins in tight circles, its hooves slipping on the cobblestones as it tries to find a direction that leads away from the dragon as quickly as possible, creating a display that combines panic with the kind of athletic ability that makes warhorses valuable. Sir Godwin, to his credit, maintains his seat with the skill of a lifetime horseman, but his face has gone pale beneath his helmet as he struggles to control an animal that has suddenly decided that discretion represents the better part of valor. Young Sir Marcus, mounted on a palfrey that is more suited to parade grounds than battlefields, finds himself facing a different but equally challenging problem. His horse, confronted with something so far outside its experience that its limited equine intellect simply cannot process the information, has frozen completely in a response that might be described as shock. The animal stands like a statue carved from living flesh, trembling slightly with the effort of remaining motionless, while every survival instinct demands immediate flight. The dragon, hearing the new arrivals and apparently curious about these strangers who announce themselves with such authority, begins to approach with movements that speak of interest rather than aggression, but demonstrate the kind of power that makes the distinction largely academic from the perspective of potential prey. Its head tilts slightly as it studies these newcomers, and you realize it's probably never seen horses before, certainly never seen horses carrying armed humans who project the kind of confidence that suggests they consider themselves predators rather than prey. The creature's nostrils flare delicately as it tests the air, gathering information about these
new additions to its environment, through senses that might perceive far more than human understanding can encompass. The dragon's approach continues with careful deliberation, each step placed with precision that speaks to awareness of its own size and power. Consideration for the effect its presence has on other creatures, perhaps even a form of courtesy that governs interactions between intelligent beings. By all the saints, Sir Godwin breathes his voice, barely audible over the sound of his horses' increasingly frantic efforts to escape from a situation that exceeds every parameter of its training. The knight's weapons and armor, so impressive when facing human opponents, suddenly seem inadequate when measured against a creature whose size alone renders conventional military tactics meaningless. Young Sir Marcus, trapped on his paralyzed mount, and unable to flee even if courage failed him, entirely turns an interesting shade of green that contrasts sharply with the bright colors of his heraldic display. I was given to understand that dragons were more theoretical. He manages his voice cracking slightly on the last word, in a way that reveals his youth despite his attempt to maintain knightly dignity in circumstances that would challenge far more experienced warriors. The dragon moves closer, and now its sheer size becomes overwhelming in ways that no amount of description or imagination could have prepared the knights to handle. Standing at its full height, its head towers above even the mounted warriors, and its eyes, those burning amber orbs that seem to contain depths of ancient knowledge, focus on them with unmistakable intelligence that transforms them from hunters into the hunted, from predators into objects of study. When the dragon tilts its massive head to examine the knights more closely, the movement carries such human-like curiosity that it becomes deeply unsettling, challenging assumptions about the nature of intelligence and consciousness that underlie the entire social structure of medieval civilization. This is not a mindless beast to be hunted and killed, but a thinking being whose motivations and intentions remain completely opaque to human understanding. Sir Roderick's Destria chooses this moment to demonstrate that despite its reputation as a warhorse trained for the most demanding circumstances of medieval conflict, it has retained excellent survival instincts that override human attempts at behavioral modification. The massive animal wheels around with surprising agility for something so large and begins to trot briskly back toward the road, completely ignoring its rider's increasingly desperate attempts to maintain both control and dignity in circumstances that make both virtually impossible. Come back here, you treacherous, you faithless, you... Sir Roderick's voice becomes a stream of curses that would make a sailor blush, but the effect is somewhat undermined by the fact that he's rapidly disappearing down the road on a horse that has clearly decided its contract doesn't include dragon fighting clauses. The knight's departure lacks the dramatic authority he was probably hoping, for his reputation for dragon slaying apparently built on encounters with creatures that existed more in imagination than in reality. Sir Godwin's mount, inspired by this example of practical thinking, and perhaps sharing some form of equine communication that transcends human understanding, breaks free from its rider's control and gallops after the Destria with the kind of enthusiasm that suggests it has been waiting for an excuse to leave since the moment it first glimpsed the dragon. Sir Godwin manages to maintain his seat through a combination of skill and desperation, but his departure becomes a rout rather than a retreat. His shouts of "this is merely a tactical withdrawal" growing fainter as horse and rider disappear around the bend in the road. Young Sir Marcus remains, though this appears to be due to his horse's complete paralysis, rather than any particular display of courage on his part. He sits in the saddle, staring at the dragon with the expression of someone whose entire worldview has just been fundamentally challenged, watching as a creature of legend demonstrates that legends sometimes walk among mortals and demand to be taken seriously. Sir Marcus says faintly, his voice carrying across the silent village square with the kind of clarity that comes when all other sounds have stopped and everyone waits to see what happens next. Perhaps we should discuss this situation like reasonable beings. The dragon pauses its great head, tilting even further to one side in a gesture that somehow conveys both amusement and approval. For a moment the tableau freezes like a scene from an illuminated manuscript. Young knight on terrified horse, enormous dragon, studying them both with obvious interest, and the entire population of Little Thornwick watching from windows and doorways to see whether this encounter will end in tragedy or something entirely unprecedented. Then something remarkable occurs that will be talked about in taverns and castle halls for generations to come. The dragon makes a sound, not the thunderous roar of its arrival that announced its presence to the entire valley, but something softer, more musical, almost like laughter, but deeper and more resonant than any human throat could produce. The sound rumbles through the air with warmth and what seems, unmistakably, like approval, as if the creature is pleased by Sir Marcus's pragmatic response to their encounter. Moving with surprising gentleness for something so massive, the dragon extends one wing and lightly touches Sir Marcus's shoulder, not roughly or aggressively, but more like a greeting between equals, perhaps the gesture of an elder, acknowledging the wisdom of a younger person who has shown unexpected sense in difficult circumstances. The wing membrane feels warm against the knight's armor, and the touch carries weight that speaks to the dragon's careful control of its own strength. Sir Marcus, to his considerable credit, doesn't faint or fall from his horse, though he goes even paler than before, and his hands shake slightly where they grip the reins. "Oh," he whispers, his voice filled with wonder rather than fear, carrying the tone of someone who has just been granted a glimpse of something magnificent beyond ordinary human experience. You're actually rather magnificent, aren't you?" And something magical happens in that moment, something that transforms the encounter from a confrontation between species into the beginning of an entirely new form of relationship. The dragon seems to approve of this response entirely, making that rumbling sound again with unmistakable pleasure, and carefully settles down in the grass nearby, bringing its enormous head down to Sir Marcus's eye level in a movement so deliberate and obviously intended to be non-threatening that even the knight's paralyzed horse begins to relax slightly. The dragon's gesture creates a space for communication between beings that share intelligence despite their vastly different forms, and acknowledgement that courage sometimes manifests not in the application of violence, but in the willingness to recognize wonder when it appears and respond to it with appropriate respect. The young knight, finding his courage in the most unexpected place, slowly dismounts from his horse, his legs shaking with the strain of the encounter, but his voice steady when he speaks. "My name is Marcus," he says formally, as if he's being introduced at a royal court rather than making first contact with a creature of legend. I'm honored to make your acquaintance." The dragon blinks slowly, a gesture that somehow conveys both intelligence and amusement, acknowledging the knight's courtesy with the kind of dignity that speaks to shared understanding of proper social forms despite the vast differences in their nature and origin. Then it does something that will be remembered and retold for centuries, something that transforms this encounter from a meeting between species into the foundation of an entirely new tradition. The dragon extends one massive claw and gently taps Sir Marcus on the shoulder, mirroring the gesture humans use for knighting, but somehow managing to invest it with dignity and meaning that transcends any earthly ceremony. The touch is careful, controlled speaking to the dragon's awareness of its own strength and its deliberate choice to use that strength in service of communication rather than dominance. From that moment forward, young Sir Marcus becomes known not as a dragon slayer, but as the first Dragon Knight, a title he will wear with more pride than any he might have earned. Through violence, a role that represents a new understanding of what courage means and what service to one's community might require in a world where legends walk among mortals and demand to be treated with the respect due to any intelligent being. Father Benedict, meanwhile, faces a crisis of doctrine and faith that no seminary education could have prepared him for. No theological text anticipated, and no amount of prayer seems to clarify. He stands in the village square, his worn prayer book clutched in hands that tremble slightly with the magnitude of the theological implications spreading before him like ripples in a pond, disturbed by a stone thrown from heaven itself. The dragon's peaceful interaction with Sir Marcus has done nothing to ease the priest's spiritual confusion, and in many ways has made his situation more complex and challenging. A rampaging monster would be simple to categorize within existing theological frameworks. Clearly a trial sent by God to test faith, or perhaps a manifestation of evil to be resisted through prayer and righteous action. But this creature, with its obvious intelligence, its apparent capacity for friendship, and its demonstrated willingness to engage in what can only be described as diplomatic relations, defies every easy classification that Christian doctrine provides for dealing with the supernatural. If the Lord created all creatures, Father Benedict mutters to himself, his Latin education warring with the evidence of his senses in ways that challenge fundamental assumptions about the nature of divine creation and the relationship between earthly reality and heavenly purpose, then surely this dragon too is part of his divine plan. But what does it mean? What am I supposed to tell the congregation? How do I reconcile the beast of revelation with this? The dragon, having concluded its formal introduction to Sir Marcus with results that seem to satisfy both parties, begins to explore the village with the careful curiosity of a very large and very intelligent being investigating new territory. It moves with surprising grace for something so massive, each step carefully placed to avoid damaging the cobblestones or disturbing the carefully tended gardens that border the houses, demonstrating a consideration for human property that suggests both intelligence and courtesy. When the creature approaches the church, Father Benedict's theological crisis reaches new heights of complexity and urgency. The dragon sniffs delicately at the wooden door, its enormous eye peering through the small windows at the altar. Within the crucifix, the simple furnishings that represent the spiritual heart of village life. Its breath warm and somehow clean-smelling. Despite the smoke that occasionally escapes its nostrils, fogs the glass momentarily before clearing, leaving no damage or mark to suggest aggression or hostility. The dragon's interest in the church building seems genuine rather than threatening, more like the curiosity of a sophisticated traveller examining the architecture and customs of an unfamiliar culture than the predatory assessment of a creature looking for opportunities to destroy or consume. Its movements around the sacred building are respectful, careful, suggesting an awareness of the special significance humans attach to this particular structure.
"Oh dear," Father Benedict says weakly, watching as the dragon examines the carved stone cross that stands beside the church entrance, its great head tilting as it studies the symbol with obvious interest. The priest's voice carries the strain of someone trying to process theological implications that exceed every framework his education provided for understanding the relationship between divine will and earthly manifestation. "I don't suppose That is, would you perhaps be interested in attending morning service? Father Benedict asks, the words emerging from his mouth almost without conscious decision, prompted by the kind of pastoral instinct that has guided rural priests through countless unexpected challenges over the centuries.
The question hangs in the air with the surreal quality that has characterized all the day's events. But the dragon, rather than ignoring or dismissing the invitation, makes a sound that might charitably be interpreted as interest. It settles down in the church courtyard, folding its wings neatly against its body in a posture that suggests respectful attention, and waits expectantly for whatever might happen next. The dragon's response creates a moment of unprecedented challenge for Father Benedict, who must now decide how to conduct a Christian service in the presence of a creature that exists somewhere between legend and reality, between earthly nature and divine mystery. The priest's dilemma extends beyond mere practical considerations to fundamental questions about the nature of God's creation and the scope of divine love that might encompass beings far beyond human understanding. But Father Benedict has survived 20 years of rural ministry by adapting to circumstances that would challenge a more rigid theologian by finding ways to make the eternal truths of Christianity relevant to people whose daily concerns center on practical survival rather than abstract doctrine. He has blessed fishing nets and harvest tools, conducted wedding ceremonies in barns when the church roof leaked, and found ways to address spiritual needs that don't appear in any manual of pastoral care, taking a deep breath that carries a prayer for wisdom and the hope that God has a sense of humor about the unexpected challenges facing his servants. Father Benedict opens his prayer book and begins the morning service. His voice wavers at first, uncertain how to proceed in circumstances that have no precedent in Christian history, but grows stronger as he realizes the dragon is listening with what appears to be genuine attention and respect.
Lord, we thank you for this day and for all your creatures, great and small, and are exceptionally large. Father Benedict begins his voice carrying across the courtyard to reach both his traditional congregation, now emerging cautiously from their hiding places, and his extraordinary new parishioner, whose presence transforms familiar words into something unprecedented.
The dragon makes a pleased, rumbling sound that harmonizes surprisingly well with the traditional Latin chants, adding a bass note to the priest's tenor that creates harmonies no human choir has ever achieved. The sound is deep and musical, resonating through the stones of the church building and the bones of everyone present, creating an acoustic experience that seems to connect earthly worship with something larger and more mysterious. Several villagers, emboldened by this sign of divine approval, or at least divine tolerance, creep closer to join the impromptu service. Old Mary emerges from her cottage, her walking stick tapping against the cobblestones as she makes her way to the church courtyard, with the determined movement of someone who has never missed a service in living memory and doesn't intend to start now regardless of circumstances. Always said the good Lord worked in mysterious ways, she whispers to Agnes, who has also gathered courage to participate in this unprecedented form of worship. But this is mysterious even for him. Still, if the dragon wants to pray, who are we to say it can't? The service proceeds with only minor modifications to accommodate the dragon's presence, each familiar element transformed by the extraordinary circumstances into something new and wonderful. When Father Benedict reaches the part about peace on earth, the dragon contributes a gentle puff of warm air that smells faintly of sulfur, but seems friendly enough, its breath creating a comfortable warmth that is welcome in the cool morning air. The warmth proves practical as well as symbolic, and several of the older villagers position themselves where they can benefit from this unexpected heating system. The dragon's contribution to the service becomes a blessing in the most literal sense, providing comfort that enhances rather than disrupts the spiritual atmosphere Father Benedict is trying to create. During the blessing of the harvest, which forms a central part of the morning service during this season of gathering and preparation, the dragon delicately nudges a forgotten basket of apples closer to the altar with one claw. The movement is so careful and precise that it's clear the creature understands the significance of the ceremony, recognizing the importance of offering the fruits of human labor for divine blessing. The apples, perfect specimens of the village's agricultural success, somehow seem more blessed for having been moved by dragon claw than they would by human hands. The gesture suggests not only intelligence but spiritual sensitivity, an understanding of sacred ritual that transcends species boundaries and speaks to forms of consciousness that human theology has never had to consider. But the real test of this unprecedented worship service comes during the weekly announcement about tithing, when Father Benedict must address the practical matter of church support in the presence of a creature whose place in the established order remains completely undefined. The moment represents a convergence of spiritual and economic concerns that no theological training ever prepared him to handle. As always, Father Benedict says carefully, his voice carrying across the courtyard, to reach the assembled villagers and their extraordinary guest, we ask for your contributions to maintain God's house and support those in need. A penny from every household, as is traditional. And as the Church requires for the proper conduct of spiritual affairs, he pauses, looking directly at the dragon, which is watching him with obvious intelligence, its amber eyes reflecting what might be amusement or approval. The creature's head tilts slightly in a gesture that suggests it's waiting for the priest to complete his thought to address the question that hangs unspoken in the air between them. And we welcome contributions from all members of our extended community. Father Benedict continues, his voice gaining confidence as he finds words that acknowledge the dragon's presence without making assumptions about its obligations or capabilities. Whatever form such contributions might take, offered in the spirit of fellowship and gratitude for God's many blessings. The dragon considers this invitation for a moment, its expression thoughtful, in ways that suggest genuine deliberation rather than mere animal response to human words. Then moving with deliberate ceremony that invests the action with dignity and significance, it reaches into its mouth and delicately deposits a small, gleaming object at the altar's steps. Father Benedict approaches cautiously, his heart beating faster with each step, as he moves toward whatever gift the dragon has chosen to offer. What he finds causes him to stop breathing entirely for several seconds, his theological education providing no framework for processing what lies before him on the worn stone. The object is a piece of worked silver, an ornate chalice of exquisite craftsmanship, its surface decorated with intricate patterns that seem to flow and shift in the morning light like living metal. The chalice is clearly ancient, its silver bearing the patina of centuries, yet it shows no signs of tarnish or decay that would normally affect even the finest metalwork over such spans of time. The workmanship exceeds anything Father Benedict has ever seen, surpassing even the finest pieces in the cathedral treasuries he visited during his seminary years. The patterns that decorate its surface seem to move as he watches, creating optical effects that suggest depths of artistry beyond human capability. Touching the chalice produces a sensation of warmth that has nothing to do with temperature, a feeling of sanctity that needs no blessing from earthly authority. I believe our dragon friend may have just made the largest single donation in the parish's history. Father Benedict announces faintly, his voice carrying a mixture of wonder and theological bewilderment that perfectly captures the morning's blend of the miraculous and the practical. From that Sunday forward, the church of Little Thornwick becomes famous throughout the region for having the most well-funded roof repair project in England, the finest altar furnishings in the diocese, and certainly the most unusual regular attendee at weekly services. The dragon, it seems, has excellent taste in religious architecture and definite opinions about the importance of keeping rain out of sacred spaces and maintaining proper standards of worship. Over the following weeks, more treasures appear at the altar steps. Coins from distant lands bearing the images of long dead kings' gems that sparkle within a fire that seems to come from sources other than reflected light metalwork that demonstrates techniques no human craftsman has ever mastered. Each offering is presented with the same ceremonial dignity, the same respect for sacred space and sacred purpose. Father Benedict's weekly sermons begin to take on themes of acceptance and adaptation, of finding God's hand in the most unexpected circumstances, of recognizing divine purpose in events that challenge human understanding. His congregation grows steadily as word spreads of the parish, with the devout dragon and pilgrims begin to arrive from distant villages to witness this marvel for themselves. The priest finds himself writing increasingly creative letters to his bishop, each one an exercise in theological interpretation that would challenge scholars for generations to come. His correspondence becomes a masterpiece of careful language that conveys extraordinary circumstances without making claims that might provoke unwanted attention from church authorities, who prefer their miracles to be safely historical rather than inconveniently contemporary. Your Grace. He writes one evening by candlelight, his pen scratching carefully across parchment. I am pleased to report that attendance at morning services has increased dramatically, and our collection plate has never been fuller. The spiritual life of our community flourishes under circumstances that demonstrate the infinite creativity of divine providence. As for the unusual nature of our recent spiritual growth, I trust that you will understand when I say that the Lord truly does move in mysterious ways, and that his creation encompasses wonders beyond our limited human understanding. I humbly request your guidance in matters of doctrine as they relate to non-traditional congregants, and remain your faithful servant in Christ. The response when it arrives is brief and somewhat bewildered. Continue as you are. If the results are godly, the methods may be trusted to divine providence. I shall pray for your continued wisdom in these unique pastoral challenges. Perhaps it would be best if you refrained from providing too many details in future correspondence. And so the Church of Little Thornwick becomes the first in Christendom to hold regular dragon-inclusive worship services, setting a precedent that will be studied and debated by theologians for centuries, while providing practical proof that divine love encompasses forms of creation that human doctrine has never had to consider. The integration of dragon and congregation proceeds smoothly with Aurum, for the villagers have begun using this name for their extraordinary neighbour, learning to modulate its vocal contributions to the service, and even developing preferences for certain hymns over others. The creature's presence transforms familiar rituals into something new and wonderful, proving that sacred space can expand to accommodate the impossible when approached with faith, courage, and practical flexibility. The reality of living with a dragon soon presents practical challenges that test every assumption the village has ever made about architecture, infrastructure, and the relationship between human needs and the requirements of much larger neighbours. The first major issue becomes apparent during Aurum's second week in residence, when the dragon decides to help with the harvest by breathing a carefully controlled amount of fire to clear a field of stubble that has been cut but not removed. The agricultural technique works magnificently from a farming perspective. The stubble burns away cleanly and evenly, the fire controlled with precision that no human technique could achieve, leaving the field perfectly prepared for winter planting, with none of the usual labor-intensive work of cutting and clearing. The heat penetrates just deep enough into the soil to kill weed seeds and pest larvae without damaging the earth's fundamental fertility, and the ash that remains provides nutrients that will benefit next year's crops in ways that traditional burning methods cannot achieve. The dragon's contribution to agricultural efficiency represents a revolution in farming techniques, demonstrating that controlled fire can accomplish in minutes what would normally require days of backbreaking labor. Auram's ability to regulate the temperature and duration of its breath with surgical precision creates opportunities for soil management that human technology cannot replicate, opening possibilities for increased productivity that could transform the entire agricultural economy. Unfortunately, the dragon's helpful intervention also produces an unintended consequence that no one anticipated during the initial planning stages. Auram's breath is hot enough to make the nearby castle walls glow like coals in a forge, turning Lord Aldrich's supposedly impregnable fortress into something resembling a massive bread oven. The thick stone walls designed to withstand arrows and siege engines prove inadequate protection against the radiant heat of dragon fire, even when that fire is applied with careful precision several hundred yards away. The castle's transformation from defensive stronghold to inadvertent heating system creates conditions that make normal habitation impossible during dragon-assisted agricultural operations. Lord Aldrich, watching from his tower window as his chambers become uncomfortably warm and his metal fittings too hot to touch, safely realizes that coexistence with a helpful dragon requires innovations in architecture that no medieval engineer has ever had to consider. Geoffrey, Lord Aldrich says to his master mason, mopping his brow with a cloth as the temperature in his stone chamber climbs steadily toward levels that make normal activities impossible. I need you to tell me about fireproof tiles, immediately and with considerable attention to practical application. Master Geoffrey, who has spent his entire career building traditional fortifications designed to withstand conventional military threats, stares at his lord with the expression of a man whose professional expertise has suddenly become obsolete overnight. Fireproof tiles, my lord, I'm not entirely certain such things exist within the realm of current construction technology. Then you'll invent them, Lord Aldrich declares, with the kind of matter-of-fact authority that has kept his lands prosperous through decades of political upheaval, loosening his heavy woolen cloak as his chamber grows warmer by the minute. The dragon seems to be a genuinely helpful creature, and I have no intention of discouraging its assistance to our farmers, but when it helps, it tends to involve rather substantial amounts of fire, and stone, as you may have noticed, becomes quite remarkably hot when exposed to dragon breath, even at considerable distance. This conversation launches what historians will later call the Great Fireproofing of Little Thornwick, a period of intense innovation that produces advances in construction technology that won't be rediscovered for centuries. Master Geoffrey, working in close consultation with the village potter, and anyone who has ever worked with kilns or furnaces, begins a systematic program of experimentation that combines traditional craftsmanship with entirely new challenges. The dragon, fascinated by this process and apparently understanding that it is the cause of the construction crisis, takes to perching nearby during the experiments with the interest of a scholar observing scientific research. Auram offers occasional small puffs of precisely controlled flame to test new materials, adjusting the temperature and duration of its breath with the precision of a master craftsman working with familiar tools. The collaboration between medieval engineering and dragonfire leads to innovations that seem to defy conventional understanding of materials science. Working together, Master Geoffrey and Aurum develop clay tiles that can withstand extraordinary heat without cracking mortar that becomes stronger rather than weaker when exposed to extreme temperatures, and ingenious ventilation systems that channel hot air safely away from living spaces while capturing and redirecting thermal energy for useful purposes. The breakthrough comes when Master Geoffrey realizes that the key is not to resist the dragon's heat, but to work with it in ways that transform potential destruction into practical advantage. Instead of trying to build walls that block thermal energy, he designs systems that absorb, distribute, and redirect it for human benefit. The result is the world's first geothermal heating system powered by dragon breath and distributed through a network of channels and chambers that keep the entire castle complex warm throughout the winter months. The heating system becomes a marvel of engineering that draws visitors from across Europe, nobles and craftsmen eager to see how human ingenuity and dragon cooperation have created comfort levels that exceed anything achieved by conventional medieval technology. The castle's transformation from defensive structure to thermal engineering showcase demonstrates that coexistence with extraordinary neighbors can produce benefits that neither species could achieve alone. Meanwhile, the village faces more mundane but equally pressing infrastructural challenges that require solutions combining traditional skills with accommodation for dragon-scale requirements. Aurum's drinking needs, for instance, proved to be substantial beyond anything the community's water supply was designed to handle. The dragon drains the village well twice in one day before the villagers realize they need to redirect it to a more adequate water source that can support both human and dragon consumption. This necessity leads to the construction of Little Thornwick's first engineered water system, a series of channels and pools that provide Aurum with easy access to fresh water while preserving and actually improving the village's own supply. The water system becomes a marvel of hydraulic engineering that serves multiple purposes while demonstrating the kind of integrated planning that modern infrastructure designers would recognize and admire. Using principles borrowed from Roman aqueducts but adapted to local conditions and dragon requirements, the villagers create a network that serves functions no Roman engineer ever imagined. The channels provide Aurum with the large quantities of water it needs for drinking and the occasional bath that keeps its scales gleaming, but they also power an improved mill wheel for Thomas that increases flour production capacity, create washing pools for the villagers that improve sanitation and comfort, and establish fish ponds that supplement the community's diet while providing emergency water storage. The fish ponds prove particularly successful as the warm water that results from Aurum's occasional use creates ideal conditions for species that normally couldn't survive the region's climate. The dragon's presence essentially creates a microclimate that expands the village's agricultural possibilities in ways that provide both immediate benefits and long-term food security. Aurum's sleeping arrangements present another significant challenge that tests the community's ability to balance respect for their extraordinary neighbor with practical needs for space and agricultural access. A dragon the size of a tower cannot curl up in a barn like a house cat, and leaving it to sleep in the common field interferes with cattle grazing and agricultural activities that form the foundation of village economy. After much discussion and careful observation of Aurum's preferences and sleep patterns, the villagers decide to construct what they diplomatically call a guest pavilion, a structure that must accommodate requirements no architect has ever had to consider. The pavilion must be large enough to shelter a creature whose wingspan exceeds that of the village church, strong enough to withstand the weight of tons of dragon, shifting during sleep, and flexible enough to accommodate the creature's movements without restricting its comfort. The design that emerges combines traditional medieval timber framing with innovations inspired by Aurum's own anatomical structure and aesthetic preferences. The dragon takes great interest in this construction project occasionally, offering to help by holding heavy beams in place with its claws or providing precisely controlled flame to shape metal fittings according to specifications that require temperatures no conventional forge could achieve. Orum's participation transforms the construction work from mere building into something approaching collaborative sculpture, as the creature's aesthetic sense proves to be remarkably sophisticated. The dragon's suggestions, conveyed through gestures and carefully modulated sounds that the villagers learn to interpret, result in proportions and details that no human designer would have conceived, but that create an architectural harmony exceeding anything achieved by conventional methods. The resulting pavilion becomes a wonder that draws visitors from across the known world, its soaring timber arches echoing the lines of dragon wings, its proportions somehow perfectly balanced despite its enormous scale. The structure provides Aurum with comfortable shelter while serving as a gathering place for community events, a symbol of successful cooperation between human ingenuity and dragon wisdom, and a demonstration that architecture can transcend purely functional requirements to achieve genuine artistry. But perhaps the most significant infrastructural development is the modification of the village's communication systems to take advantage of capabilities that no human community has ever possessed. The traditional church bell, designed to carry messages across the village and to neighboring communities within a reasonable distance, proves inadequate for communicating with a creature whose hearing range extends far beyond human capabilities, and whose own voice can be heard for miles in any direction. Working with Aurum, the villagers develop an entirely new form of long-distance communication that revolutionizes the exchange of information across the region. The dragon's roar, carefully modulated to convey different meanings through variations in pitch, volume, and duration, can reach communities that are days away by foot travel. Combined with traditional bell signals and coordinated with other villages in an expanding network, this creates a communication system that links Little Thornwick with distant settlements in ways that would have been impossible before. The communication network proves its worth during the first emergency after its establishment, when a fire breaks out in a village 15 miles away. Aurum's warning call reaches Little Thornwick in minutes, allowing the community to organize aid and send help long before any human messenger could have covered the distance. The saved village returns the favor weeks later when raiders threaten Little Thornwick, their warning transmitted through the Dragon communication network, allowing the community to prepare defenses and request assistance from Lord Aldrich's garrison. The success of the communication system leads to its adoption by other communities throughout the region, creating an information network that spans distances that would have required weeks to traverse using conventional medieval methods. The network transforms isolated villages into connected communities, enabling cooperation and mutual aid on scales that change the fundamental nature of rural life. When the harvest festival approaches, the village finds itself hosting visitors from across the region and beyond, all eager to see the famous dragon and the innovations its presence has inspired. Little Thornwick transforms from an isolated farming community into a center of technological and social experimentation, a place where the medieval world glimpses possibilities it never knew existed. The festival itself becomes a celebration not just of the harvest, but of the successful integration of the magical and the mundane, the legendary and the practical, the ancient and the innovative. Aurum participates fully in the festivities, providing spectacular fire displays that illuminate the entire valley, helping to cook feast foods with perfectly controlled flame that achieves culinary results impossible through conventional methods, and even allowing brave children to ride carefully on its back during traditional harvest games that take on entirely new dimensions with dragon participation. The Harvest Festival at Little Thornwick becomes an annual event that draws thousands of visitors, pilgrims and merchants, nobles and craftsmen, all eager to witness the place where humans and dragons have learned to live together in harmony and mutual benefit. The festival demonstrates that coexistence between species can produce innovations and joys that neither could achieve alone, setting an example that inspires communities throughout the medieval world to reconsider their relationships with the mysterious and magical elements that exist at the edges of ordinary experience. Word of the dragons spreads along the trade routes with the speed that only truly extraordinary news can achieve, carried by merchants and pilgrims, minstrels and traveling craftsmen, spreading from village to village like ripples from a stone cast into still water. The news travels faster than any horse, faster than any royal messenger, because it carries the kind of wonder that compels people to share it immediately with anyone who will listen. Soon every tavern, from London to Edinburgh, from Dublin to the remote monasteries of Scotland, echoes with tales of the village where legends have come to life, and the impossible has become wonderfully, profitably ordinary. Little Thornwick finds itself firmly positioned on commercial maps that previously ignored its existence entirely, as traders and entrepreneurs recognize opportunities unlike anything the medieval world has ever seen. The village that once struggled to attract a single merchant willing to make the journey from the nearest market town now finds itself at the center of a commercial revolution that transforms not just local economy, but the entire understanding of what becomes possible when human ingenuity meets draconic cooperation. The first merchant to arrive with specifically dragon-oriented business intentions is Aldred, the traveling trader, whose usual stock consists of salt and iron tools, bolts of serviceable cloth, and small luxuries that make village life marginally more comfortable. Aldred has built his modest reputation on practical goods and honest dealing, establishing relationships with rural communities that value reliability over excitement. But he takes one look at Aurum sunning itself peacefully in the common field, and immediately begins redesigning his entire business model with the enthusiasm of a man who has suddenly glimpsed the future of medieval commerce. Dragon scales. He announces to anyone who will listen, his voice carrying the excitement of a merchant who has discovered an entirely new market with unlimited potential for profit. Genuine dragon scale armor protection. Beyond the dreams of kings, proof against any blade ever forged resistant to fire that would melt ordinary metal, guaranteed to make the wearer invincible. In any battle, ladies and gentlemen, I offer you protection that no earthly craftsman could create. The ambitious sales pitch encounters an immediate practical obstacle that deflates Aldred's initial enthusiasm considerably. As Thomas the Miller points out, with the kind of blunt practicality that has kept the village functioning through generations of challenges, Aurum shows absolutely no signs of shedding scales voluntarily, and no one in the village possesses either the courage or the foolishness necessary to ask the dragon to part with any of its magnificent bronze armor deliberately. The scales that cover Aurum's body appear to be permanent fixtures, integral to the creature's anatomy, rather than renewable resources that might be harvested without causing harm or offense. Aldred demonstrating the adaptability that separates successful merchants from those who cling rigidly to failed strategies, pivots immediately to a more practical and infinitely more marketable approach. Dragon-blessed armor, he declares, adjusting his pitch with the skill of a seasoned salesman who recognizes opportunity even when it differs from his original expectations. Metal worked in the presence of a real dragon, the creature's own mystical breath used in the forging process. Protection enhanced by forces beyond ordinary understanding, weapons and armor that carry the blessing of legend itself. This revised approach proves far more practical and generates immediate interest from customers who understand that proximity to magic often confers benefits even when direct contact remains impossible. Godwin the blacksmith, whose forge has become the center of intense regional interest since Aurum's arrival, discovers that he can indeed use carefully controlled dragon breath to achieve temperatures and metallurgical effects that would be completely impossible with traditional coal fires or even the most sophisticated conventional techniques. The dragon-forged metal that results from this collaboration possesses properties that seem to defy every principle of medieval metallurgy, while producing results that speak for themselves. Swords hold their edges through combat that would dull ordinary blades. Armor distributes impacts more effectively than conventional design should allow, and tools maintain their sharpness through work that would destroy normal implements within days. Whether these improvements result from the extreme temperatures of dragonfire from some more mystical property of the forging process, or from Aurum's direct involvement in the creation of each piece, no one can say with certainty. What matters to customers is that the results are unmistakably superior to anything produced by conventional methods. The collaboration between Godwin and Aurum develops into a partnership that revolutionizes not just local metalworking, but the entire understanding of what becomes possible when human skill combines with draconic capability. The dragon learns to provide precisely controlled heat that allows for finishing work impossible with any other method, can heat specific areas of a blade without affecting the rest of the metal, and can provide the exact thermal conditions needed for complex alloy work that exceeds the capabilities of any human technology. Soon, Godwin finds himself taking orders for dragon-forged tools and weapons from nobles and merchants across England, and beyond his prices tripling overnight, but demand far exceeding his ability to produce even at these elevated rates. Aurum seeming to understand its role in this new economy, and apparently enjoying the creative challenge of metallurgical work, develops a schedule of daily forge assistants, appearing punctually each morning to help with the day's projects, with the reliability of any skilled craftsman committed to maintaining high standards. Other merchants quickly follow Aldrid's lead, each developing their own dragon-themed products, with varying degrees of authenticity, creativity, and commercial success. Helena, the herb woman, begins marketing Dragon's Breath tea, an ordinary blend of mint and chamomile that she claims has been blessed by proximity to mystical fire and enhanced by the presence of ancient wisdom. The fact that Aurum does indeed occasionally sniff curiously at her herb garden, sometimes providing gentle warmth that extends the growing season and enhances plant development, lends genuine authenticity to her marketing claims that goes far beyond mere advertising hyperbole. Helena's dragon-blessed herbs prove to possess remarkable properties that justify their premium pricing and growing reputation throughout the region. Plants grown in the warmth of dragon breath seem more potent than their conventionally cultivated counterparts, their essential oils more concentrated, their healing properties enhanced beyond what natural growing conditions typically produce. Whether this enhancement results from Aurum's direct influence from the improved growing conditions the dragon's presence provides, or from some combination of physical and mystical factors, the practical results speak for themselves in ways that satisfy both herbalists and their customers. The village baker, inspired by the commercial success of his neighbors and recognizing an opportunity to capitalize on the dragon's presence, begins producing dragon loaves, bread baked in ovens heated by controlled dragon fire that imparts a distinctive smoky flavor and creates crusts that stay crisp for days. The loaves prove extraordinarily popular with travelers who need provisions that won't spoil during long journeys, and soon he's taking orders from inns and taverns throughout the region, his bread becoming a sought-after specialty that commands premium prices while establishing Little Thornwick's reputation for unique culinary excellence. But perhaps the most successful dragon-related enterprise begins quite by accident, growing from a simple moment of interspecies musical appreciation into a commercial revolution that transforms medieval entertainment and creates an entirely new form of artistic expression. Young Tom the shepherd's son discovers that Aurum has a profound and sophisticated love of music when he plays his wooden flute while tending sheep in the fields near the dragon's pavilion during lazy summer afternoons. The dragon's response to music proves immediate, enthusiastic, and remarkably sophisticated. Aurum approaches when Tom plays, settling down nearby to listen with obvious pleasure, occasionally humming along in a deep bass voice that harmonizes beautifully with simple melodies while adding harmonic complexities that no human musician ever imagined possible. The sound the dragon produces exceeds anything any human throat could achieve. A voice deeper than the deepest organ pipe, perfectly pitched and capable of complex harmonies that add dimensions to familiar tunes that transform them into something entirely new and wonderful. Word of the musical dragon reaches the ears of traveling minstrels who arrive to investigate this phenomenon with the professional interest of entertainers who recognize a revolutionary development in their field when they encounter it. What they discover transforms medieval music forever and establishes Little Thornwick as a center of artistic innovation that draws performers and audiences from across the known world. Aurum not only enjoys music, but proves capable of learning complex harmonies with remarkable speed, remembering intricate melodies after hearing them only once, and even improvising variations that demonstrate genuine musical creativity and artistic sensibility. The dragon's musical abilities suggest intelligence and aesthetic sensitivity that challenge every assumption about the nature of consciousness creativity and the relationship between different forms of life. Soon, dragon songs, musical pieces specifically arranged for human and dragon performance, become the most requested entertainment at festivals and celebrations throughout the region and beyond. The collaboration between human musicians and dragon vocalists creates music of unprecedented richness and complexity, performances that draw audiences from hundreds of miles away and establish new standards for musical excellence that influence composers and performers for generations to come. The economic impact of these dragon-related enterprises extends far beyond novelty goods and entertainment, transforming Little Thornwick from an isolated agricultural community into a commercial center that rivals established market towns. Aurum's presence has made the village famous throughout England and across continental Europe, and fame brings opportunity on a scale the community has never experienced and could never have imagined possible. The village finds itself hosting regular market fairs that grow larger and more elaborate with each passing season, drawing merchants from London and Paris, craftsmen from distant guilds eager to learn new techniques, and noble customers seeking goods that cannot be obtained anywhere else in the world. The increased commercial traffic requires extensive improvements to the village's infrastructure that transform not just economic capacity, but the entire character of the community, while somehow preserving the essential qualities that made Little Thornwick special in the first place. As autumn deepens into winter and the first frost paints intricate patterns on cottage windows, like nature's own illuminated manuscripts, the relationship between Little Thornwick and its dragon resident settles into something neither the villagers nor Aurum could have imagined when they first encountered each other during that misty morning that now seems like years ago, though it has been only months since legend became reality. What began as mutual wariness progressed through curious cooperation and evolved into genuine partnership has created a rhythm of life that enriches both human and dragon existence in ways that continue to surprise everyone involved. The extraordinary has become wonderfully ordinary, woven into the fabric of daily life so seamlessly that children who were born after Orum's arrival will grow up thinking that every village has a dragon, that this is simply the natural order of things. Orum has learned to recognize individual villagers not just by sight but by scent, voice, and the subtle behavioral patterns that make each person unique. The dragon greets each villager with gestures perfectly suited to their personality and relationship. Gentle nudges of its great head for the children who have never known fear of the creature. Respectful nods for Father Benedict that acknowledge the priest's spiritual authority, and elaborate wing displays for Sir Marcus that speak to the honor between warriors who have found their calling in protection rather than conquest. The practical benefits of this partnership extend far beyond the commercial success that has made the village famous throughout the known world. When storms threaten, Orum spreads its wings to shelter the granary where the community's winter food supply awaits distribution. When wolves approach during harsh weather, a single roar sends them retreating to the deep forest. When the old and infirm struggle with winter's bite, the dragon's carefully shared warmth keeps them comfortable through the coldest nights. During the first major winter emergency, a blizzard that cuts the village off from the outside world for nearly a week, Orum proves its worth as more than just a curiosity or commercial asset. The dragon's presence becomes literally life-saving, its body heat distributed through Master Geoffrey's ingenious thermal system, keeping the entire village centre warm enough for survival during temperatures that would otherwise have claimed several lives among the elderly and very young. But perhaps the most remarkable aspect of this coexistence is how Orum has adapted to human social customs while maintaining its essential draconic nature. The creature attends church services with the regularity of the most devout parishioner, contributing its harmonious rumbling to hymns and following the rhythm of the liturgical year with understanding that goes beyond mere routine. Its presence has transformed Father Benedict's sermons into meditations on acceptance, wonder, and the infinite creativity of divine love. Market days fascinate the dragon, which observes commerce and social interaction with the keen interest of an intelligent being studying a different form of civilization. Orum has developed an uncanny ability to assess the quality of goods and the honesty of merchants, occasionally offering subtle opinions that have become invaluable to both buyers and sellers who value integrity in their transactions. Village festivals have become legendary throughout the region, with Orum's participation creating celebrations that draw visitors from across Europe. During the winter solstice, the dragon creates magnificent displays of controlled fire breathing that illuminate the entire valley, turning the longest night into a spectacular festival of light that can be seen for dozens of miles in every direction. Children have simply incorporated Orum into their world with the remarkable adaptability of youth. They play games around the dragon's enormous feet, use its tail as a slide during summer afternoons, and treat their extraordinary neighbor with the same mixture of affection and respect they show any beloved community member. Orum, in turn, takes obvious pleasure in their company, often lowering its great head to watch their games with unmistakable amusement. As winter gives way to spring and you sit by the village wall in the gathering dusk of another peaceful evening, watching Orum glide gracefully across the valley toward its pavilion. For the night's rest, you reflect on how completely your world has transformed since that first impossible morning. The dragon's silhouette against the sunset is no longer a source of terror, but of deep satisfaction and quiet pride. The creature roars its evening greeting, a sound that once struck fear into every heart for miles around, and now serves as a gentle reminder that all is well, that another day has passed in harmony, that tomorrow will bring new wonders and simple joys in equal measure.
You smile as you realize the truth that would have seemed impossible just months ago living in the Middle Ages. With a dragon is indeed much like living with any other valuable community member, except that this particular neighbor happens to breathe. Fire can fly and has never once asked for anything more than acceptance, friendship, and the occasional tribute of honey-sweetened bread.
And most importantly, you think drowsily as Aurum's contented rumbling lulls the entire valley towards sleep. The dragon has never once failed to say good night. In the distance, you hear the soft sounds that mark the end of another day in a place where the impossible has become wonderfully ordinary. Children's laughter drifts from cottage windows as families gather for evening meals. The gentle lowing of cattle settling for the night mingles with the whisper of wind through newly leafed trees. All the familiar sounds of home made richer by the knowledge that tomorrow will bring new possibilities for wonder and connection. This is a world where fear transformed into friendship, where the legendary became ordinary through the simple magic of acceptance and cooperation. Here in Little Thornwick, dragons and humans have learned to share the same sky, to build something beautiful together that neither could have created alone. Let yourself drift now, carried by the gentle rhythm of a village where all creatures great and small have found their place, where every evening ends with the peaceful certainty that some stories conclude, not with conquest or destruction, but with the quiet satisfaction of different worlds learning to become one world richer and more wonderful for the joining. Rest now in the knowledge that in this peaceful valley, all is well, and tomorrow will bring new chapters in the endless story of community friendship and the magic that happens when we choose wonder over fear. Sleep well and good night.